Powerful storms, heat waves, rising sea levels, declining ice caps and drought are now manifesting across the planet. These are the signs of global warming that so alarm Michael Mann, one of the world's leading climate scientists, who works at Penn State University. Mann is most famous for a chart he once drew.
In the late 1990s, I published a graph that has come to be known as the hockey stick curve. What it shows is that the recent warming is this unprecedented spike that has no counterpart as far back as we can go in the record.
The significance of Professor Mann's hockey stick curve was not lost on the most powerful industry in the world, big oil.
And because of that, I myself, the author, the primary author of the hockey stick, had become a major object of attack.
In 2009, internal emails among climate scientists were hacked and then leaked. Dubbed ClimateGate by the conservative media, the oil industry and its supporters claimed the emails showed Mann had manipulated his findings about global warming.
And there were many sort of words and phrases in those emails that were perfectly harmless in the context of the email, but when taken out of context, could be used to try to make it sound like scientists were engaged in all manners of nefarious behavior.
Basically, it was an exercise in shoot the messenger, and that's what they did with Michael Mann.
Republican politicians wanted Penn State to dismiss Mann.
They ran advertisements against me in the local newspaper. I received death threats, threats against my family. I had been sent a letter that contained a white powder that had to be investigated by the FBI. It turned out that it was not a deadly substance, but it was clearly an effort to scare me.
Even a former CIA caseworker got involved, offering a potential payout to Mann's colleagues at Penn State if they would accuse Mann of fraud.
There was a veritable price on my head, in the sense that there were people who were putting out bounties for those who could destroy me.
In the end, 6 official investigations, including by US government agencies, cleared Mann of any professional or scientific wrongdoing. This didn't slow down the attacks against him.
Many of the attacks that I was finding myself subject to appeared to be coming from organizations and front groups and hired guns who were actually paid by the Koch brothers.
The Koch brothers are 2 of the most powerful people in the global oil industry.
So it really began to feel like I was under assault by Charles and David Koch.
The Koch brothers are 2 of the most wealthy individuals in the United States.
Charles and David Koch own Koch Industries, a $100 billion conglomerate based in Kansas that refines, transports and sells oil. The company is also into chemicals, minerals, paper products and commodities trading, employing 100,000 people in more than 60 countries. And it controls 1 to 2 million acres of Alberta's tar sands, the 3rd largest reserve of oil in the world.
The Kochs are a vertically integrated fossil fuel conglomerate, and they have a vertically integrated influence peddling apparatus to go with it.
The Koch's primary goal is to stop climate action at every turn.
Yet the Kochs are more than just about selling oil. One of the goals of the Koch's political network is to get the Republicans elected to office and the occasional Democrat.
They have a vast network now, a political network that rivals the other parties. They're bigger than the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in their organizing might.
And while the Kochs don't support Donald Trump in this year's election, they are throwing their resources behind Republicans to ensure they retain control of both houses of Congress.
They're very concerned that the Democrats will take over the Senate.
So there's a huge amount of interest in who controls the Senate after this election is over, regardless of who becomes president.
A lot of their spending has managed to stop real policy from happening in Washington.
This monster of a storm system is the remnant of a powerful Pacific typhoon.
While one of the richest families in America is behind attacks on climate scientists like Michael Mann, global temperatures are reaching record highs.
Australia's record-breaking heat wave is continuing to fuel outbreaks of wildfires across scores of thousands of hectares in the southeast of the country.
The worst predictions keep coming true. So you're looking at an unprecedented drought in the west. You're looking at extreme weather all over the place.
The water level at Oradell Reservoir is nearly immeasurable.
All signs suggest 2016 will be the hottest year on record, with the past decade the hottest in history. Wildfires, drought and flooding are plaguing North America. 3 years ago, carbon dioxide passed 400 parts per million in the atmosphere, the highest level in more than 4 million years. Scientists now forecast temperatures will rise 2.5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit over the next century.
The science around global climate disruption is 97%.
While NASA predicts this means more severe weather and impact on communities worldwide, the US Republican-controlled Congress and Senate refused to take action, voting down the McCain-Lieberman climate bills and refusing to vote on the Paris Agreement.
The United States Congress is the single biggest obstacle to global resolution of climate change.
The US Congress and Senate's inaction on climate change is no accident.
That gulf between scientific opinion and public opinion has been bought with hundreds of millions of dollars of special interest money.
In the mainstream media, Chris, there is a denial of the growing skepticism in the scientific community about global warming.
The campaign to sow doubt about climate change and prevent meaningful action began decades ago, particularly as the science became more certain.
Your party wants to be credible on science. You've got to accept science, do you?
Yeah, I always wanted to play and inherit the win. But...
In 1988, NASA climatologist James Hansen testified in front of Congress.
The greenhouse effect has been detected, and it is changing our climate now.
Most scientists weren't yet convinced. That included me until about the mid-1990s, when the evidence really became quite convincing.
Climatologists, like Mann, discovered that temperatures had risen by 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit since the late 1800s. 2/3 of that warming has occurred since 1975.
The observations were showing that there was a prominent warming trend in the data that was outside of what we would expect from natural climate variability.
Yet, long before climate scientists began raising alarm about global warming in the 1980s and 90s, scientists who worked for the oil industry had realized years earlier that burning fossil fuels would cause climate change.
From what we understand, the oil industry was aware of climate impacts and climate science decades ago. ExxonMobil in particular was actually conducting cutting-edge climate science research decades ago.
Exxon's scientists warned the company this warming was caused by burning fossil fuels and the consequences would be catastrophic. But Exxon, along with other oil companies, hid this information from the public.
The oil industry embarked on a campaign of deception and disinformation.
The whole strategy is about creating doubt, making the public, making politicians, making political leaders feel that we don't really know for sure whether or not this is a problem.
Harvard University science historian Naomi Oreskes studies how the oil industry creates doubt about climate change.
So if you can create doubt in people's minds, you can delay action. So that's what this is all about.
The oil industry's campaign grew more intense in 1988 after the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was created and began documenting the rise of temperatures and its impacts.
During the 90s and the 2000s, ExxonMobil and a number of oil companies were well known for funding climate denial activities.
The oil industry used the same methods and even the very same public relations firms that tobacco companies employed to spread doubt about the dangers of smoking.
We do know that some of the key people who began challenging climate science, who began denying climate science in the late 1980s, had previously worked for the tobacco industry. We know that they began to use the same strategies and tactics, often the same arguments, the same vocabulary.
A driving force behind spreading doubt was the American Petroleum Institute. The API is the lobbying arm of the oil industry. In 1998, API wrote an internal memo that said victory would be achieved when average citizens understand uncertainties in climate science.
The industry at large spent something like over $500 million sort of disseminating doubt and basically trying to confuse people in the United States.
However, Exxon eventually stopped financing climate denial groups because of pressure from environmental organizations.
Exxon had to back off, and in about 2005, 6, and 7, they stopped funding the very groups that they had been sending millions to in the years prior, and they dropped them like a hot potato. In the meantime, the Koch money came in.
The Koch brothers quickly filled the void with even harsher methods.
Perhaps their greatest achievement is helping convince the world that global warming doesn't exist.
Greenpeace soon dubbed the brothers' apparatus the climate change denial machine.
It's a network of corporations and think tanks, front groups.
The difference between the Kochs and an Exxon is they built an enormous apparatus to push a much broader tectonic change in American politics and government.
Charles Koch has said that even if the planet is warming, it will not have catastrophic consequences, and argues climate scientists' models for future warming are faulty.
The Koch brothers have spent, at this point, $80 million on climate denial front groups. That money has been focused at both the federal and state level.
The Koch brothers' politics were shaped by their father, Fred Koch, a chemical engineer who grew up in Texas and seems to have had few scruples. Back in the 1930s, Fred invented a new kind of technology to refine oil.
He had a hard time getting work in the U.S., and so he tried to find work elsewhere in the world and ended up selling his process to very unlikely sources.
Jane Mayer is an investigative reporter with the New Yorker magazine in Washington, D.C., and author of Dark Money, a best-selling book about the Koch brothers.
Quite ironically, given that Fred Koch became one of America's most right-wing anti-communists, he made the beginning of his fortune by setting up oil refineries for Joseph Stalin.
Another early customer for Fred's technology were the Nazis in Germany after 1933.
He ended up building a refinery for Adolf Hitler that had to be green-lighted specifically for Hitler after he became chancellor in Germany. It became very important during World War II.
Fred eventually set up Koch Industries in Kansas, investing in oil refineries. He had 4 sons. 2 of them, Charles and David, eventually took over running his company.
Charles Koch has always been the dominant brother in the family. He's domineering, he's smart, and he's ruthless. And his younger brother, David, has been sort of more good-natured and going along with him.
But the brothers also embraced their father's distaste for government regulation.
They don't like the government, and they want the government to be smaller and disabled. That would help their business a lot if there was fewer regulations.
By the 1990s, the brothers realized they needed clout in Washington.
Koch Industries is becoming a huge company. It's a fossil fuel company with a horrendous record for environmental violations, and it runs smack into the new regulations that are being imposed by the Environmental Protection Agency beginning in the 80s.
The Kochs wanted to change those laws.
The 1996 presidential campaign.
To do that, they set their sights on influencing the Republican Party.
It's 1996. David Koch at this point goes from trashing conventional politicians to becoming the vice chair of Bob Dole's presidential bid on the Republican Party ticket.
You'll get a better feel of who Bob Dole is and what he's all about.
There was a big fight within the Republican Party at that time about whether or not Republicans should accept the reality of climate change, and look to market-based solutions to fix it, or whether they should deny it. And one of the things that we know is that there was tremendous lobbying and advertising from the fossil fuel industry on the denial side.
At the very time of that internal debate, the Kochs built a network of at least 17 different think tanks and front groups to influence the entire political system, often referred to as the Kochtopus.
Members of the Koch donor network are seeding money to these hubs.
So essentially the Kochs have built an apparatus to manufacture their political agenda.
The single most important thing to understand about the Koch network today is that it is unparalleled in its complexity.
This network created what's called an echo chamber for their ideology.
Well, the echo chamber concept is that you create an infrastructure of groups that keep echoing the same idea outward.
Today, the Kochs fund a wide range of organizations, from the National Rifle Association, the Cato Institute, Heritage Foundation, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Donors Trust, and ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. But its most powerful weapon is an organization called Americans for Prosperity.
Americans for Prosperity is now the primary political front group that the Kochs founded and fund. It's just become a kind of a guerrilla army that is almost like a third party in the United States now.
Housed in this office tower in Arlington, Virginia, just across the river from Washington, D.C., Americans for Prosperity strikes fear into the hearts of politicians.
When Obama was elected, they emerged as the key force in driving the Tea Party. They grabbed it and they corporatized it.
And appears regularly on Fox News.
What we're going to have if this climate change legislation passes, this cap and trade, are gas prices through the roof.
Today, the Koch's political apparatus spends hundreds of millions of dollars during elections.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And puts out tens of thousands of TV advertisements to get their chosen Republicans elected.
Kay Hagan, taking care of Washington insiders.
The largest purpose of that money was to change control of Congress, to change control of the presidency, to elect Republicans.
All told, Koch money has gone to more than half of all senators and nearly 40% of all congressmen.
At the beginning of the current election cycle, the Kochs announced that they and their network would spend $890 million.
That's a huge increase from the $40 million Americans for Prosperity spent in 2010 to help the Republicans win control of Congress during the midterms.
In 2012, it had $400 million, which was well above anything it had had prior to that.
And in 2014, they spent $290 million to help Republicans win control of the Senate.
You have sold West Virginia out. Families are suffering.
We know that Americans for Prosperity, just to name one group, had run 33,000 ads in tight Senate races around the country.
The Kochs also hold conclaves twice a year, inviting fellow billionaires and hitting them up for cash.
That club grew from just a few members in 2003 to now 400 to 450 of the richest, most conservative businessmen and women in America. And it's attracted all kinds of important dignitaries, too.
Including Supreme Court justices and Republican stars like Ted Cruz, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Marco Rubio, and Trump vice presidential running mate Mike Pence.
So you get, as a major donor, you get to spend a weekend chatting with the person who's going to be making policy that could drastically affect your bottom line.
One of the key purposes of this political apparatus is to ensure that no legislation is passed to curb the burning of fossil fuels.
The Kochs have gotten over 170 members of the House to take a pledge that they will never support any legislation that puts a tax on carbon.
So they screwed up the entire House of Representatives for years.
The Koch's influence on the Republicans on climate change is powerful.
We had a period where a number of important Republican leaders, again, were coming to the fore saying this is real.
By 2008, leading figures in the party such as Mitt Romney, Senator John McCain, and Republican House Leader Newt Gingrich were calling for action on global warming. Gingrich even appeared in this ad with Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi calling for steps to be taken.
We don't always see eye to eye, do we, Newt?
No, but we do agree our country must take action to address climate change.
In 2011, however, Gingrich renounced the ad.
First of all, it's probably the dumbest single thing I've done in recent years.
And then there was tremendous pushback from the Americans for Prosperity.
I think they saw that as a bigger threat than Al Gore or Bill Clinton or anything on the left.
And unfortunately, you saw a number of Republicans that once supported climate action suddenly ratcheting that back.
And Republicans who refused to toe the line, such as Bob Inglis, a conservative congressman from South Carolina, paid a heavy price. Inglis had become convinced that climate change was real.
And so when the evidence was in front of his own eyes, he changed his point of view and he started speaking out about climate change.
In 2010, when Inglis was running again for Congress, Americans for Prosperity swung into action during the primary.
And he lost badly to a very underqualified candidate who the Koch machine brought in. So he was then hung up in the public square as an icon of what happens when a Republican turns good on climate change.
Another one of those icons of example was climate scientist Michael Mann.
Joe Barton decided to use his authority as the chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee to hold hearings, to subpoena my personal records, all of my personal emails.
In 2010, Greenpeace revealed that Barton, a Republican congressman, received money from the Koch's Political Action Committee.
And they attempted to smear me in op-eds in conservative-leaning newspapers.
While the Kochs were attacking legitimate climate scientists, they were funding scientists who denied global warming was caused by burning fossil fuels.
And I've been receiving money from whoever that wants to give me money.
One of the key strategies is to recruit either scientists or people who pretend to be scientists. Sometimes they are actually scientists, but rarely scientists in a particular field.
One example is Wai-Hok Soon at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. He says climate change is caused by variations in the sun and not by CO2, and that more carbon in the atmosphere is good for growing plants.
We sent a Freedom of Information Act request in to the Smithsonian, and we requested who was funding him. And eventually, after years of discussion, got back a list of his grants.
Who might be funding your grants this year?
In total, Soon received $1.2 million from the oil industry, a large portion of which has come from the Koch brothers.
They funded him for many years, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and putting his voice out there was a campaign to get a counter voice in the mix.
In the correspondence between him and the industry, he speaks specifically about deliverables, about particular products, particular papers, making particular arguments that the fossil fuel industry wants.
And yet, Soon has no training as a climate scientist. His background is aerospace engineering.
Dr. Soon has already talked about those issues on the stage today and in the past.
When he was asked, he says, well, these are my authentic beliefs. I'm not being paid to say anything I don't believe. And that may well be true. The point is, though, that he is a complete outlier science. He has views that are shared by almost no one in the scientific community.
Mr. Koch. No, excuse me, Mr. Koch. I'm Connor Gibson. You're wanted for climate crimes.
The Koch's funding of climate denial has not always gone smoothly. Physicist Dr. Richard Muller at the University of California, Berkeley, was a global warming skeptic whom the Kochs backed. But in 2012, Muller produced a study that concluded global warming was caused by carbon dioxide.
So I was flabbergasted. Not only was global warming real and roughly consistent with what the previous groups had said, but the match to carbon dioxide and the fact that solar variability was not responsible.
The Koch's attacks on critics don't stop with climate scientists. Jane Mayer of the New Yorker magazine, who's exposed the Koch's efforts to undermine climate change science, found herself the target of their harassment.
They actually funded, either directly or indirectly, a private eye to spend months digging up dirt on me in hopes of trying to undermine my reputation. And I discovered this all later. It was fascinating, but it was a really great example of how ruthless they could be.
This activity to generate doubt is effective. Polls show that about 70% of Americans believe that global warming is real, but only half of those believe that humans are causing it, and only 16% are very worried about it.
I think we have very, very strong evidence in this case to support the conclusion that these campaigns have been highly impactful. So until quite recently, many Americans have thought that the science was unsettled, even though scientists will tell you that it's been settled for 20 years. So why would they think that?
Politicians are not taking action, and that includes Democrats. Even when the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress, they did little on the file.
Most Republicans in Congress, and even some Democrats, are very, very afraid to try to do something about climate for fear that they will be targeted by fossil fuel interests and that they could lose their seats.
What was just a dream of a mass movement of hundreds of thousands of citizens.
For this November's election, the Kochs are focusing their money on key swing states and districts to ensure the Republicans retain power in Washington.
And that's probably where we're going to see it.
The use of the Kochs' money to influence elections is most visible in Nevada over the fight for retiring Minority Leader Harry Reid's Senate seat.
Harry Reid, the retiring senator, he's been a real champion for environmental issues, protecting our clean air and water, combating climate change, but he's also been someone who's been really trying to shine a spotlight on the Koch brothers' influence on our electoral process.
4 separate Koch-backed front groups have thrown their money behind Republican candidate Joe Heck. A Republican congressman, Heck is opposed to any efforts to curb greenhouse gases.
He has been an ally of big polluters in office. He's received over $300,000 from them, while the Koch brothers have spent $7 million to prop up his campaigns. Not only that, he's returned the favor by voting in favor of protecting over $50 billion in tax breaks for oil companies.
This is not the way our democracy should be working. Incredibly powerful, rich people who spend this kind of money should be held accountable.
They have polluted our public discourse. They have skewed media coverage of the science of climate change. They have paid off politicians.
Considering what this means for our health, for our kids' futures, for our planet, it is unconscionable that the Koch brothers are denying climate change and fueling this kind of anti-climate activity.
The situation in Antarctica offers cause for concern as well.
Scientists now fear if action is not taken to drastically cut greenhouse emissions soon, global warming will run out of control, with major extinctions around the globe, large coastal cities such as New York and Tokyo underwater, and wars and conflict due to mass migration of people becoming the norm.
The number of lives that will be lost because of the damaging impacts of climate change in the hundreds of millions. To me, it's not just a crime against humanity, it's a crime against the planet.
In early October 2016, 7 of the world's top climate scientists warned the planet is on track to pass the 3.6 degree Fahrenheit threshold for dangerous global warming by 2050, only 34 years away.